Hope everyone's enjoying their PAX so far. We are, definitely.
Yeah,
woo! So let's get started. Who am I, and why am I here, right? Why is Ivern dancing as well? I don't know. So I'm Mark. I'm the lead champion designer at Riot Games, and my in-game name is Riot Scruffy. And my partner in crime here is John Frank, and his in-game name is Soter. He has the very important but thankless job of doing balance work on the game, so he's probably nerfed your main more than once.
Probably. I'm sorry. I'm very, very
he
sorry.
sometimes gets to buff champions as well, but mostly nerfs. So we're here to talk about Ivern, right? And the beginning of every champion story is actually kind of the hardest part, right? This has changed a lot over the years, and we start in these very rough spaces. A lot of creative people say the hardest part of the process is the blank page, and that is definitely true. So we have this thing where we call it the opportunity space of a champion, where we don't know what we want to make. We look at what we've done. We say, okay, we've been making a lot of top laners, or we made a marksman and a support, so let's try something different. Is it a mage? Is it a jungler? And we come to these sort of loose ideas, very loose ideas. And then on the thematic side, we sort of just gather stuff. Concept artists are always doodling in their free time. People are watching, what's sort of, capturing people's attention on TV or in the movies or in other games. And there's always a zeitgeist around one thing or another. And we start to discover things that we would, feel like we'd get hyped about and our players would get hyped about. So this is what leads to Ivern. And so the opportunity space that we determined for Ivern, and this was like, in December of last year, is a nature magic, kind of a druid-like character. He actually ended up being a bit more of like a dryad, I would say, in the classical sense, but a sort of sage personality and this sort of martyr story of redemption and sort of like a good character that has kind of come back to a good ending. And these concepts on the right this is stuff that goes back actually, and sometimes years, right? So the concept artists have been doodling on stuff, and this is like these druidic characters that we actually had attempted gameplay kits for probably a couple times. I think that certainly T tried a kit like a couple years ago, didn't work. He loved the snail one right in the middle, and we tried a couple things, and eventually we're like, okay, this could lead to something. This could become Ivern. So then things evolve. We've got our opportunity space. And let's start pitching gameplay ideas. And so when the game designer is looking to get started, we know the loose stuff, and so we come up with big ideas, and we make paper designs for them. And this is all just write down what the abilities are, what the goals are of the character, what makes them unique, what is the hook, you might say, and we evaluate them at that stage. So a couple of the ideas we had was this pacifist jungler, which was like, he doesn't hurt the monsters, and he's kind of a low damage character. Okay, that, as you can see, made it pretty far into the final product. Another was like a monster tamer idea, like really heavily into the monster tamer. He's all about, he captures the jungle monsters and he brings them into your lane to gank and stuff like that. And so that didn't quite make it as far, but kind of came back later on in what ended up being Ivern. And then a totally out there off the wall idea that you basically don't see at all in Ivern's kit is the seed network idea. He's planting seeds all over the map, he's gaining territory. We kind of like, the analogy that we like to use was it's like the Zerg creep from StarCraft, and so he's sort of gaining control of the map by using his nature magic. At the same time as we're making these gameplay pitches, the concept artists are starting to refine and discover what they think is like the real unique visuals or the unique silhouette. And so like, Chris Campbell, the concept artist on Ivern, kind of had this revelation where he said, I want to try a version that has this really, really tall, really, really lanky, kind of like, he actually kind of looks like a tree, like a real tree, where it's very thin and tall, and he's got like viney, noodly arms. And these are sort of the halfway point concepts that we were working with, and we said, we really love this, let's commit to this direction. So then when we also were looking at all the options of the gameplay hooks, we had to pick. And so we sort of beat them up. We looked at the paper kits. We did another round of iterations. And we said, no, the pacifist jungler, this is what's interesting. This is going to bring the sort of support, a really, really, truly support kit into the jungle. This is going to create a lot of interesting stuff. So let's go with that. And so then when we're saying, okay, let's make the pacifist jungler. So we deep dive, we make our first prototype. And what did we get from the pacifist jungler? Why was it interesting? The unique jungle clear, as you guys know if you have played Ivern, is really a big thing. He doesn't spend the time killing the camps, right? He sort of plants his magic and he gets to move on. And so this creates a bunch of things, right? He has lots of free time. We're like, this guy has so much presence on the map. He can gank a ton. He can do this sort of unique power farming route where he sort of sets up the whole jungle and then farms it all in one go. Or he can even do a lot of like pretty aggressive invading, counter jungling, stuff like that. And the other half of this, as the pacifist jungler theme sort of inspired us, was this guy had literally 0 damage. The first version of Ivern that we play tested had 0 damage on anywhere on his kit. None of his spells did damage. His auto attacks did no damage. They just slowed. They slowed you. So he'd had these really he just like hit you with these auto attacks, did nothing. And this was a cool, pushing it to an extreme. And it's kind of like one of the best ways to discover if something is going to work or if it's compelling is just go to 11, right? Go so far, see what's working, see if it's busted, see if it's not even fun. And that's what we did here, right? Ivern had 0 damage. So that was definitely interesting in playtest for a couple weeks. So once you're at that stage, you've got the sort of the hook, you've got where you're going with the theme, you've got the early visuals, you've got the pitch for like what we want this character to be. We needed to develop sort of the iconic spells, like the specific details of the spells that we're gonna build the kit around. So for like a Blitzcrank, it's obviously his hook. Or for a Scion, it's his Q where he's just giant charge up, slam the ground, and stun in an area. Or for Nidalee, it's her spear. For better or worse. And so we're trying to find these spells for Ivern. And so the first spell that we came to that was really compelling, because we were still dealing with the 0 damage Ivern at this time, and we're like, this guy he needs to do something that is fun, because doing damage is fun in League of Legends, and he did none of that. And so he needs to do something that feels like I can make a play, it feels like really impactful in the game, I can win a game based on these spells. And so the Q was kind of the first thing to emerge. This was the team dash, right? This is this actually GIF is ripped from a how not to use Ivern's Q video that was on the League Reddit for a while. But it's the rooted target, and your whole team can dash into them. So this was a really interesting spell, and this was a great starting point for us because it felt great to use. You could make tons of like really high impact plays. You could get picks for your team with this. You could set up your allies. You could set up yourself. It led to a lot of good ideas for the other spells because a lot of things can combo off of this mechanic. And it sort of started to define as well his strengths and weaknesses. When we're building a champion, we want to sort of understand what are their strengths and weaknesses and why are they different? Why is Ivern different than Lee Sin? Why is Ivern different than Nunu? Why is Ivern different than supporty characters like Thresh or Nami? And so for this, it was like giving an aggressive dash to an ally. Okay, that synergizes super well with immobile melee types like Nasus or Darius. And it also synergizes, it's a single target spell. It synergizes well with teams that want to generate picks, right? It's like a Dark Binding Morgana Q kind of on crack. And so that's a great starting point. And later we'll talk about it, and you can see how some of the other spells came from this, because this was one of the first spells that we had. And then it was Brush. And so this was like, we knew we were making this plant man. We had never done the Brush before. We're like, we have to find a way to get a character to make Brush in League of Legends. This is like a given from the beginning, but we hadn't really solved what that means. And what is the type of character that should have Brush? And how do you make Brush? What are the rules of the Brush? What is the cast shape of the Brush? What are other things that teach players how to use Brush effectively? Because Brush is actually a very subtle mechanic, right? It's not immediate, throwing a brush down on someone. It doesn't really do anything off the bat. It's extremely sort of hard to understand what the value of it was. And so we immediately set to work and we said, let's figure out what this brush is about. Let's figure out what the fun cases are. And at first we just had a big chunk of circular chunk of just brush, and you just plop them down all over the map. And then we started to see the fun moments and the interesting sort of strategies that you use brush for were like full-on blocks of vision, like trying to wall off the dragon pit, or trying to wall off a choke point in the jungle, or even a lane, like when you're pushing a tower, creating a full wall of brush. And so then the cast paradigm evolved a bit from just being a circular blob to like this sort of connected system where it sort of tries to connect to nearby walls or other brush that you placed. And on the sort of, how do we teach Ivern players to use the brush, this is where the sort of auto attack passive comes in. And this is cool because it was two birds with one stone for us. Allowing Ivern to have a ranged auto attack sometimes and a melee auto attack at other times creates a lot of depth for the character in terms of using his Q. Because the Q rule set says, I dash into my auto attack range, and so a skilled Ivern player, and like, this is pretty hard to use, and so, you know, people like me, maybe you could do this. Even then it's tricky, but a skilled Ivern player can determine, okay, do I want to come in, do I want to dash all the way in, or do I want to just go halfway? And they can plan, do I use a brush, get the buff, dash in halfway, or do I let the buff fall off, dash in the full way? Stuff like that. Great. So things are going great. We've got a couple iconic spells. We're building the kit around. We know there's some fun there, but you know, we're a couple weeks in, and we cannot get this pure pacifist thing to work. You know, we've been testing it for weeks. 0 damage Ivern was just, no one really liked it, and we're trying to figure out why, and it led to a lot of weird scenarios. And so we sort of broke it down, and we had to make a hard call. It was really unique, and it was really interesting. And the sort of intellectual designers in us all were like, oh, we want to make this character. He does no damage. It's going to be so cool. But we had to cut the cord on it. So what was going on, right? Satisfaction problems, clearly. We knew this was going to be the case from the beginning. And no damage just feels really, really bad, right? You don't ever get to get a kill. Like it was impossible for him to get a kill. He could never end the game with more than 0 kills because he did no damage. Well, actually, it was possible because the tower could kill someone. Yep. No, actually, he never got damage to tag them.
Oh,
I don't know. It was so rare. It was so rare. And they also just like kind of broke a lot of the basic game loop. League of Legends is a game built around damaging objects, damaging other players, damaging minions, damaging the jungle, stuff like that. And so he would show up, you know, in an empty lane, and he couldn't even farm. He couldn't last hit. He would, you know, a team fight would happen, and he would be the last one alive on his team, and there's enemies running away at like 1 health, and he'd chase after them, and he'd be hitting them with his auto attacks, and they're getting slowed, but he could never kill them. And so it was just like, it led to so many problems, and so it was not going to work. It was becoming pretty clear that it was not going to work in its current form. On the other side, the scaling and role that we wanted for this character were also not very compatible with the no damage pattern, right? Like, he was this weird no item monster, right? Because he couldn't ever scale his damage. And so what items do you want if you build no damage? I guess tank items, cooldown reduction items, but it's pretty loose. It was like the lowest scaling we'd ever seen. And so we could never probably make him be a jungler with this intact, right? We wanted, part of our sort of original goals was, can we make a support character that goes to the jungle? And that's going to be really unique. You know, you're going to have a very unique team composition because you have a support in the jungle, and that maybe lets you bring a tank as your actual support in the bot lane, or it lets you bring a mage to bring extra damage.
Or a misfortune, maybe.
Or a misfortune, yeah, there you go. Right, we see the future. But with no damage, he had really, really poor scaling, and so a jungler is a position that gets gold in the game, and so there would be no reason to take him to the jungle because he doesn't even care about the gold that he was getting. So that was another problem. So we said, you know what? We're going to give him damage. And not this much damage. Even though there are some Iverns that try this, we gave him a little damage. We're like, let's make him a typical support character damage. We're like, we'll give him Janna level damage, which is pretty low. And so we sort of feel like we maintain the spirit of the Ivern experience, but you know, solved a lot of the problems in literally doing no damage. So at this point, right, this is the time in development where we've put a lot of things out there. We're starting to test the character, and we're discovering what's working and what's not. And building champions is an extremely iterative process. That's like the only way to make it good is you make it bad like 10 times. And then you, then you finally get to the point where you find out what is good. And so we also were taking a hard look at his personality, right? And this sort of table shows Old Vern, which we love to attach any possible name we could think of to Ivern. We called him Old Vern, New Vern, God Vern when he was OP. God Vern was like a very common one. Field of Vern, whatever it was. And so this is Old Vern. And Old Vern was like wise. He was a martyr. He was kind of weird. He was serious. He was very calm and sincere. And, you know, honestly, it was kind of boring, right? We were sort of listening to our first VO auditions, and he was like, it was like, I don't know, it was just like listening to some, like an old, man read you a book. And so it was never working. And so we said, what is it that is happening in the game? Because people were enjoying the character in the game, but the personality wasn't really matching that. What's the play experience that we were having that was fun? And the play experience was then as New Vern, right? It was kind of trolly. He was still wise. He's an old, tree that's lived for hundreds of years, but he's more of an oddball. He's fun. He's upbeat. He's trolling people, right? And he's still nice. He's a nice guy. We say, okay, what can we preserve that's important here? Okay, he's a wise old tree man, and he is a nice guy. Genuinely, he is a nice guy. And we shifted the whole thing into like the experience of Ivern is much more about the fun combined with the sincerity. And so like this is like at this time we were also we were evaluating like changes to his looks. The picture on the right is actually one of the earlier concepts of Ivern with the mask, and he's actually kind of scary. Mm-hmm. He's kind of intense. That's like badass Vern. Yeah. And we didn't go in that direction, but we were exploring other faces before we kind of got to the nice man face. But in this phase we were like, we need less of one thing and more of another thing. I kind of am sad that we didn't end up going with this one in the end, but you all get to see behind the curtain. This is what Ivern could have been. And so the final piece of the puzzle, right? We've got the sort of keystone spells that we're building around. We've solved a lot of the problems, like he's not a pacifist anymore, he is a pacifist, but he's not breaking the game by doing no damage. Mm-hmm. And we've got all these nice complementary spells, but the very last thing, was the ultimate. Not every champion gets their ultimate last. Actually, we prefer to do it not last because it can be very hard. But for Ivern, we didn't have an ultimate until the end. We tried all these different things. He planted himself in the ground and turned into a tree and made everyone around him get Earth mode. Sounds cool. It was not cool. And so what we eventually came to was Daisy. And how did we get to Daisy, and why was it working? So Daisy was like this great sort of closing the loop on a lot of things. It closed the loop on the story, right? He helps the jungle. He helps them escape from, without getting killed. They're his friends. And then Daisy comes back to help him because they're friends, right? And so it's like, oh, that's great. It's like the resolution of the story. It's like the payoff for all the work he does for the jungle. And for his kit, he's a support jungle. He doesn't get to be this awesome duelist. He doesn't get to kill people. He doesn't get to like make the plays himself. He's got this kit that's built for like, man, if I had this bruiser melee, I would set them up for all these awesome plays. And so we're like, well, why don't we just give him a pet that's a bruiser melee? And so whenever he wants to, he can have it. And so that Daisy sort of filled all these roles. Daisy was his complement in his gameplay, and Daisy was also his complement in his sort of story. It sort of closed the loop on his story. And, he gave him a best friend, lots of fun moments. They get to high five. I think the gifts are broken, yeah? Well, and so that was, and that was really the end of it. And that was the final piece of the puzzle for Ivern. And, at that point we said, wow, we know what's going on here. We have the personality we like. We have the gameplay we like. It's just time to sort of polish it all up, fix the bugs, put it together, and balance it, which is always... I'm glossing over that, but it's not as easy as it sounds. And that is Ivern. And hopefully, you guys are all seeing Ivern on live now, and you're enjoying playing him. I am. So that is the end of Ivern's story, or the beginning, you might say. And let's do some Q&A. So we have a lot of just joint experience as game designers across a lot of different groups, right? I'm working on new champions. I worked for many years on champion updates, And John's worked on both sort of the game systems, which is items and the jungle and the map, and game balance. So honestly, feel free to hit us up with anything you want to know, anything about champions, about the preseason, about our plans for the future of League of Legends, the past of League of Legends, which we can't change, unfortunately.
Yep. I think we have the microphones on either side here, so just step up to them and we'll go one by one. Pardon?
Walk to the mic if you have a question. Line up at the mics and we can just swap back and forth. We have someone already there. Go ahead.
I'm Joey.
Hey,
Joey.
I'm just wondering how long, like, in terms of maybe hours, does it take from the different departments to make a new champion?
Hours, man hours. Yeah, a champion pod is like, because the champion team is making multiple champions at the same time, but one group that's making one champion, like the pod that was making Ivern, which we call them by colors, and so it's kind of funny they were green pod, it was very appropriate. They're about, between designers, programmers, QA, artists, sound, writing, they're about 10 people, and they're working on the champion mostly full-time for about 9 months. So that's, if I'm doing the quick math here, right, that's
1,500.
yeah. I mean, that's like almost 15,000
hours.
15,000 hours. Yeah.
Yeah. That's not even including like external partners that we have and people working on the skins as well.
Localization, publishing, right? All of the promotion. Yeah, but that is like the core of, and this is, to be fair, this is us taking our time and putting as much sort of love and care into the champion as we can. There was a day, I mean, some of you older League of Legends players might know, there was a time when we released a champion every patch every 2 weeks, and that was like definitely not 15,000 hours every 2 weeks. So this is about, our kind of philosophy has changed where we're trying to say, there are 130 champions in League of Legends. Players don't care about volume at this point, they care about sort of quality. And so we'd rather put 15,000 dev hours into a champion that's gonna be like a classic forever than just pump out a bunch of mediocre stuff.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Joey.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi. I always find it really funny when you guys release a new champion, or when you're developing a new champion, no matter what your intention is, the day that champion hits the PvE, there's a video on YouTube saying X champions jungle clear. And I was just kind of wondering, how much time do you guys spend testing champions for roles and builds that you didn't necessarily anticipate?
Yeah, you wanna talk about this one? John?
Sure. I would say a lot more time than we probably should, mainly because we're all players and we all have fun with the game as well. So any excuse for someone to take the new champion into the jungle or into a lane that is off-suited is like snatched up very quickly. That being said, there are like actual particular cases where we're like, oh, we really don't want this champion to go into the jungle, and then we pay like extra attention. I don't know how many playtests, but many hours, I guess, is the like very broad answer I can give you.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to drill down on that.
We like to support champions having an off role because that's kind of a fun part of playing the character, and if you're really invested or you like to do things creatively. And so we tend to, kind of understand in our minds, we're like, oh, where is Ivern probably being played when he's not in the jungle? Oh, it's probably support, and let's see how that is. Or where is, Nautilus being played when he's not in the jungle? Oh, it could be top or it could be support. And so we do try and test that. Although sometimes we test it and we say, oh God, that is really, really bad for the game for whatever reason. Either it's kind of like frustrating to play against, or it breaks down a certain, flow of the experience. God, I mean, think about, whenever we make a top lane fighter, we worked on Kled, you did all the balancing for Kled. We did a lot of, Kled, everyone internally was like, oh, we're gonna make Kled jungle a thing. We're gonna make Kled jungle a thing. We're like, no, Kled jungle is not a thing.
It's really bad.
But even then, it goes to live, and Kled jungle's kind of a thing. It's not good, but people want to be Kled jungle.
Yeah, I think the funny thing with Ivern is like anytime a champion in our test starts getting overtuned, and we do that, like tune them from very weak to very strong. As soon as they get to the very strong point, someone's like, oh, I'm taking them top lane and seeing how they do against like one of the standard bruisers top, and if they can like stand their ground with Darius, then we're like, oh,
This is
okay,
Tarek-
tune it back
Tarek
down.
top. Yeah.
Tarek was a pretty good
Tarek
example of that. Where
This is a good, Medler, one of the other designers that you guys might know of, he has a great way of saying it. He says, if your champion is showing up in lanes they're not supposed to, they're probably just overpowered. Which is actually pretty true. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Hi. How does creating a new champion compare to, say, revamping a current champion?
Yeah, totally. Having done a good amount of both of these things, they're very similar in most respects. The end result is a great League of Legends champion, a great MOBA character, and that's pretty much the exact same thing. You know, it's a character with some depth, with some skill expression, with a satisfying thematic, with gameplay and art that matches the theme, with a good amount of counterplay, right? There's a package of like what is a good champion, and you're both aiming at the same thing. But then here's where the big difference comes from. With an update, you have a pretty clear foundation of what players care about, what people are attached to on a character, right? When we remade Poppy, we're like, people love that she's a tough Yordle, which is kind of a fun contrast. She has a big hammer and she's really small. She's really small and she's really tanky. She doesn't go down. And she has this really cool, like forceful body slam into a wall. These are things that there's already a foundation to build on, and you have to respect that. With a new champion, there's none of that. And so sometimes it's easier because you could do whatever you want. But at the same time, that's also hard because you could do whatever you want. And that leaves you with so many options that you have to sort of narrow it down, and find what is the most compelling thing in the infinite sea of champions you could make.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Hi. Quick question. With champs that you design, is there any champ you can confess on stealing from, say, an inferior game, Dota 2? Because I noticed that they seem to create champions that are already in League, if that makes sense, and if there's any like rivalry between that, or you guys just let it slide, or
There's not a ton of rivalry, I think, but there is a lot of like, when you become a game developer, our mentality, at least mine personally, I'm sure John's is the same, is just we try to learn from anything we possibly can. Is that other games? Is that books that we're reading? Is it something we see in the newspaper about medical technology, right? I mean, it could be anything, right? And so we kind of, it's okay to sort of wear some inspirations on your sleeve, and you need to, but we're not trying to like direct copy. No one ever goes into any project and says, oh, check out, Bloodseeker. Let's go make that guy, right? But it's like in some ways there are influences, right? Oh, Warwick, there are some vibes of, a Bloodseeker style gameplay in a champion like Warwick, but it's not the same thing. And what it often is you're getting to the root of why is that cool? What is cool about that? Oh, the cool thing is that I'm a hunter and I'm preying on the weak targets, and that's a really compelling fantasy that, some players, myself included, are like, oh, I want to do that. I want to play that guy. Cool.
quick one. When's the next Alawi skin?
I mean, I can't confirm or deny anything like that, but like, the skins team tries to rotate as evenly as they can through, and so I don't think Alawi has got a skin since her release.
Right.
And
That's what I'm asking.
if that's the case, there you go. Yeah, I'm like, I'm pretty sure. And so who knows? Her time is coming.
Mecca Alawi, thank you.
Oh, okay.
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
Let's do it.
Hi, you sort of might have answered this a bit before, but I was wondering how you guys go about differentiating between trying to sort of fix the meta, progress the meta, and shape it with the way you design champions from the ground. Like the difference between when you reworked Graves, I kind of got the impression he was meant to be an ADC in the bot lane, but he went off to the jungle, and you sort of obviously can try and balance for the new thing or just push him back in the spot. How do you guys choose that? And then how do you choose to try and balance around the meta, like reinforcing bot towers because everyone ends up duo botting?
Yeah.
Totally. You should talk about this. Like, how do we decide when players do something that we didn't expect, if we like it and we want to keep it or not?
Yeah.
Which is
I think the
all
first
the
step
time.
is Graves jungle like inherently unhealthy? Is it doing anything that we're just like, oh, this is terrible for the game? Players are going to be incredibly frustrated by it. Graves might be a bad example because the answer is probably yes. But when it came out and people were going to the jungle, we're like, okay, we obviously gave him mechanics to do the jungle well. Are we happy with what he's doing there? And generally the answer was, yeah, go for it. Like, we want to give players the freedom to experiment, and if they find out something cool, we'll let them run with it. Kind of like skipping over to the tower bit, that was a little bit more on the line of, oh, we have a game that we feel is almost solved. It is pretty stagnant. It is not particularly fun to play or to watch. And so we did kind of take somewhat a heavy-handed approach by being like, okay, there's going to be more aggression over these turrets. It's going to be important for you to like fight over the first one, and the best place to fight over is going to be in the bottom lane. So I think we're pretty happy with our decision there. I don't know, you have anything to add?
Totally, no. I mean, that was more of a problem to solve, right? I can remember we sat down in a meeting and we're like, yo, everybody's lane swapping and it sucks. We need to fix it. And so we put down all these ideas, and it was like, oh, we could do like Tower First Blood, or we could just make the dragon have like 7,000 gold on it, or we can like do this and this and this. And then we sort of like stack ranked them, and I think that in the end it did turn out as well as we'd hoped. And so we sort of set out, in that case we set out for a goal and we accomplished it. In the case of Graves, we did actually originally hope and think, oh, he's going to be bot lane, and he turned out to be the jungle, and we said, you know what, players are enjoying this, let's support it. And it's not completely ruining the game, so yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, I was interested to come here because you were talking about Ivern, and that really interested me because I have yet to see him in a game. To me, it looked pretty bad on the streams that I saw, and I still haven't seen him in a single game. I was sort of wondering about that, so I was really glad to hear you talk about him today. But my question is, how do you choose which champions to sort of rehash? So, for instance, recently we've had Cogmore, Rise, Vega a little bit, and how you chose why those champions? Because to me, I mean, Cogmore we've had roll back, but he felt very unique. Why did you choose to remake him and then roll him back? And then Rise and Vega, you've changed them around a bit so their Qs are essentially the same thing. It feels like they're all a bit more generic rather than previously they felt a bit more unique. So how did you choose to do those particular types of champions, and why did you change them the way that they are now?
Sure. So there's a couple questions going on in there. So the starting point is, how do we choose which champions to remake, to update? And there's like a couple different types of updates that we do, right? There's large updates and there's kind of smaller updates. And so it's actually not the same process. When we're doing the large updates, these take a lot of time and a lot of resources. It's like making a new champion almost entirely. And so those are more we're going for the absolute bottom of the barrel. These characters, we couldn't fix them unless we pour this much investment into them. This is how we got to the Scions and the Poppies and the Terraks and the Yoriks, right? These actually seem not surprising. I don't think we had any players go, oh my God, you're reworking Yorick? Like, it's obvious, right? There's 100 threads on the boards every single day saying when was the Yorick rework coming out. And so it's like, those ones are easy. We just go straight from like the most in need up. I think it'll get interesting for us in a year or so when we start to not have as many obvious choices. And then we'll have to start thinking about what is our strategy there. On the other side, when we're doing these group updates that we've been doing like in the pre-seasons or in the mid-seasons, this is more about a class. We hit a class that we think needs attention for one reason or another. We hit the Juggernauts because these are characters that are they didn't really function in high-level play, and they needed some differentiation. Or we hit the Marksmen because, well, as a class it works very well in our game, but they were all very homogenous, and how can we make them more unique? Or, and it's mages and assassins and so on and so on. And then once we're in that class, we look at all the characters that are available to us, and we find either pairings of characters that are very similar and we'd like to pull apart, or characters that are just really dated and might need, maybe they have really dated skills and it doesn't lead to a lot of skill expression, or it doesn't lead to a lot of good decision making. Or, in the case of, take Kog'Maw for example, right? This is one you're asking about. This is a case where we thought, yeah, Kog'Maw is unique. Can we go farther, push him even farther in that direction, which is what we ended up doing. And we're like, let's go to 11, let's do this. And actually sometimes, you do go too far. And in Kog'Maw's case, we went so far, and we're like, well, this has now introduced some new problems that are kind of breaking down what the character is doing, and so we step back on that. With other cases, though, we didn't go far enough, and so it's like, I think we over time have learned to take the approach of kind of going for the bigger change, and then sort of paring it down. Hopefully, we do all this in development instead of post development, until it's into a place that we like.
Yeah. Just to add on. I had a little bit more to add. I think the Rise was another case you mentioned.
Yeah, his Q is very similar to
Okay.
Veigar's rebuild as well.
Yeah, I think there are like certain combos you can do with Rise that are like pretty appreciative. Like clearing the minion wave as him is amazing, for instance. But I think that was a combination of like a VGU. Like we had him slotted because like, oh, his visuals were really outdated, and at the same time we're like, oh, every time he has popped back up and been popular, it's been actually like a game health problem where he shows up everywhere in competitive. Normal players like can't really get their head around him because his spell combos are really complex and require like very low ping. So that is like another avenue as we get pushed by like visual updates.
It actually speaks to another thing too, which is that some things that used to be, maybe when League of Legends first came out, used to be really original, and you would think as like, this is a really, this is really characteristic mechanic of a character. Nowadays, like, they're kind of just basic building blocks of the game, right? Something like a skill shot, that's not exclusive, right? Maybe back in the day it was like, damn, Ezreal has a skill shot. This is crazy. No one else does this. Now it's like, no, we don't even think about, that's not what defines a champion as unique. It's just a basic way to sort of cast a spell in League of Legends. And so, yes, 40 champions could have basic skill shots. It would not be a problem. 130 champions have auto attacks. That's part of League of Legends. And other things over time, we sort of adopt into the general vernacular, like, okay, multi-hit passives. This is a basic gameplay unit, and a chunk of characters can have them because they work in a positive way. Or like multicast spells, right? This was original the first time we put it out, but it's like, no, we like multicast spells. We want to give it to different characters as they come and see what they need. Cool. Thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Hello. Go ahead. Yes.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, where is Graves' cigar?
She didn't hear.
But do we put it somewhere?
No. You might not have heard. I think maybe we only talk about this in A or something.
Yeah.
Graves vapes. Did you have another question?
No, that's right.
Wow, she went in line. Yep. Just for that. Go for it.
Hey guys, happy Saturday.
Oh, thank you.
So you touched on something just then about how things were new, and then as over time they kind of homogenize or whatever. How do you draw a balance between whether something is new and fresh, or whether it's just adding to the skill creep?
Ooh, that's a good question. Because not everything we put in, some things we put in, we want them to be very unique and very, everything we hope is sort of fresh, but like some things we want to stay unique over time, right? We want to put in I'm trying to think of a great example. Well, okay, take Ivern's brush, for example. Ivern can make brush, and we think this is something that makes Ivern really unique. We're not looking, and we've talked about it now, and we're saying, let's not turn making brush into a basic skill that many, many, many champions have, right? Let's let that stay as Ivern's thing, and that keeps Ivern sort of in his own little pocket of the champion sort of pool. Other things, like a 3-hit passive or a skill shot, I don't think anyone at the time when we made them were like thinking, man, this is like, nobody should ever do this but Vayne, right? And it's like, and so you can see early on what is worth preserving, either because it's like really thematic, or it's really just interesting on its own, or even sometimes some mechanics don't scale well. They don't stack well. If everyone on your team was making brush, the whole map would be brush, and it would just look dumb, and it would also not even do anything. So some mechanics also just don't scale very well. If everyone on your team has a 3-hit passive, there's some cost to that, right? There's a lot of noise in terms of particles on the screen, but it's no different than everyone having an attack speed buff.
Yep. And how many worlds does Faker have to win to get an Ari skin?
Poor Faker, man. He should have played Ari.
Yeah.
Should have
Thanks,
played
guys.
Ari. Thank you.
Hi. When it comes to Ivern, one of the things I really like about them is he has many unique mechanics. I mean, there's each character has their own unique feel, but he particularly stands out in regards to his unique mechanics, which I think is awesome. I was just wondering, how do you balance around unique mechanics like that? And are you planning any champions at the moment with other unique mechanics?
You should start with the balance part of it. I can talk about that.
Oh man, I got excited about the other part. Are we planning other champions?
You're gonna just drop
I can't
bombs?
answer, but yes. I can't give specifics. I'm sorry. The question was
So
how do we balance
the unique mechanics?
over like how many unique mechanics they get?
Well, I mean, compared to balancing damage, right? Like, someone does 500 damage, this person does 300 damage, right? There's math there, but like, how do we balance the intangibles of an Ivern dash or a Kled ult or whatever it might be, a Tom Kinch eating you?
Yeah, well, I'm going to take a slightly different perspective in terms of like, how do we balance how many they get? And like, we do have different champions of different skill levels, and so Ivern is like chock full of new mechanics that are new and unique. Whereas like Kled is a little bit on the simpler side, and we do like try to have champions that are accessible to a lot of people, and then champions like Ivern who are probably going to be a little bit niche, in part because they're mechanical complexity, in part because they're like a support in the jungler, and not everyone wants that. In terms of how we like balance the overall power, it's a lot of like getting in there, actually play testing it. I think one of the difficulties in like balancing Ivern was how strong is this brush mechanic? Like we had no idea whatsoever until we like really got into the game and like saw how many outcomes it could do. Like for the first 10 games I played him, I was like, I think this mechanic is actually a nerf to him just across the board, because they kept on making me play against Rengar, and so I kept on giving him brushes. I would kill my teammates every time. There was a lot of very upset people in our playtest for about 2 weeks, until I had a final moment. I got very excited. I put a brush and made Rengar jump into tower range, and he died. And I was like, I've been planning for that my whole life. But I guess the TLDR is it's very hard, and we kind of have to go through a playtesting regimen to get there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an exact science too, right? These things change over time. Like we already predict that Ivern's brush is pretty powerful, but it's going to take time for players to understand it. And so, Ivern today has a 48% win rate. If we did nothing and we just let, we cryo sleep for a year and come back, boom, Ivern's 52, right? People have just gotten better at the character, and that takes time, and so that's why we constantly patch. That's why we balance the game as it goes. Cool. Thanks for your question. Thank you.
Sorry, any other champions in the world?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna like spill the beans on all of our future champions, but making unique mechanics is a core part of what we think is a great new champion, especially, right? This is the opportunity where we get to actually genuinely add something new to the game, and so hopefully it's something that you sort of the game doesn't have, or you've never seen before, or comes and brings something fresh. And in particular, we think that that's increasingly important because what impressed people in 2010 or in 2013, or it takes more and more and more, and so we're trying to continually one-up ourselves and sort of surprise you guys, and so that's like, yes, expect more.
Yes. Glad to hear it. Thank you.
My question was more about items and like past champions, like what's his name? Fuck, I haven't played the game in like a year. Sorry. Like past champions were stronger if they had skills that were based around items.
Sure.
So
yeah, that happens all the time.
Yeah, if you bought armor, it'd make a skill stronger. Do you feel like forcing the player into buying certain items because that champion works that way is viable? Because you're removing choices by making them buy something because the skill set says you need this to be viable.
Do you want to talk about this?
I can like touch the surface of that, which is like, well, it is kind of constraining the player into like giving them a subset of items to get. It also makes them decide between those items. If we give the people carte blanche across our whole item set and are just like, pick whatever you want, that doesn't give them much to go by, and then they can't really differentiate game to game. Like, why would they want one item over another?
Right. Yeah, and there's some pros and cons here, right? Like, there's something very satisfying when your champion that you play has like a clear synergy with a certain type of item, and it feels really great. Like, you're like, I play Aurelia, and I get that Triforce, and my kit has like all these rapid spell casting, which lets me weave in the Triforce procs with my auto attacks. That feels great. but it is in some ways a little constraining. So if we just sort of if we nerf Triforce by a lot, it probably does affect Aurelia. And so overall, we think it's generally a positive when there's some amount of clear synergies of items that you like. But we don't want that to be so constrained that you're like, these are the only 6 items I can buy. My fate is completely tied to them. You know, I just ride the roller coaster of how strong is Blade of the Ruined King or something like that.
Also, what is your favorite champion to play yourself?
Oh, that's for me. It's probably. I mean, yeah, don't hate me, but I'm a big time Singed. I'm a dirty Singed main.
Oh man, that is dirty. I used to always answer Janna because it's a very safe question. Like, very few people get mad at you when you say that.
Boring.
But for the past year, I've been like on an Alawi train where I just keep on playing her. So I'm all about this mecha Alawi. I have to talk to our skins department.
Oh my gosh.
Want to get that going.
I don't think we can be friends anymore.
Thank you. Thank you. Howdy.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering how you guys kind of came to the 3-hit passive kind of being the golden number. Like, you've got passives that are different, kind of like Time Can't. You've got to hit 4.
Sure.
Why is 3 the golden number?
I mean, 3 as a number is kind of a golden number in terms of tracking it. It's multiple actions, but basically the smallest number that feels like multiple actions. You know, because 2 is like kind of so immediate, and the first one is already instant. And a 3-hit passive is actually kind of a core. The reason why this has kind of become a core mechanic is it's just engaging in combat over a certain amount of time gets you to a result. And so sometimes it's 3-hit passive, sometimes it's just, you know, I have a spell that does a dot over time, or sometimes it's I have a steroid, like an attack speed buff, which I just don't get the benefit from unless I'm using it for the full duration. And so I think that's kind of how we came to it. I mean, we're definitely, you know, there's always options to try 4 or 5, and depending on what your champion is. If you're Jhin, you're 4, and it feels good because we really work to make 4 feel good. If, you know, you're Vayne, 3 feels good because you have an auto attack, a reset on your tumble, an auto attack, and then a spell or something like that.
Yeah. My favorite little anecdote about 3-hit passives is there's kind of an ongoing battle over who created it. Right. Which the answer is probably no one, but there are 2 developers who think they did, and then there's like little breakdowns of like, oh, well, that's not really a 3-hit, that's like a 3-spell passive. So there's definitely differentiation there, but it's all about like creating some time.
Yeah, that's totally, it triggers me. When we did the Shin update, and it was like, he gets a buff for the next 3 hits. And everyone's like, why are you adding a 3-hit passive to Shin? I'm like, that's not a 3-hit passive, that's a buff for 3 hits.
Such a big difference.
Such a big difference, such a big difference.
If I could just ask one more thing. When do you guys get to the point where you think there's too many champions for a new player to come into the game? Because at the moment,
yeah, that's a good question.
It must seem overwhelming for new players.
This is a big part of why we are focusing on quality over quantity at this point, because we don't think League of Legends needs 150 champions to be good or needs 200 champions to be good, but we do think that League of Legends does need a constant influx of new champions to stay fresh for an active player. So we're kind of already there, and so I think that rather than, you know, finding that point where we're like, the bucket is full, we're done, we're just more looking for ways to create systems that can allow us to have this many champions in perpetuity for like in a healthy way, right? I'm like I feel like I'm constantly pitching to people. I'm like, oh, we got to make our, you know, random draft mode, or we got to make AR or something like that. And it's like, these are the types of things that we think can turn this enormous champion pool into something that feels a lot smaller for the player.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you. I think we have about 12 minutes left, and there's still quite a few people in line, so probably limit it to 1 question. We might be a little bit more brief, so excuse us for that.
Hey, oh my God, what happened to my face? So I was going to ask about Stargate and Urgot, but I feel like I should use a more loaded question. When are you releasing another female Yordle, or more importantly, a Yordle with a Swordle?
A Yordle with a Swordle. Oh my gosh.
That's in your area. You get the
Swordle. That's funny that you say that. There was a concept a couple years ago that kind of ended up becoming Kled, and it was a guy with a sword, and we called him Swordle. And he was like the most interesting Yordle in the world, kind of like the Dos Equis thing. I don't know. It's Kled now. Don't worry. It's all good. I mean, I can't say anything about when we would. I mean, I think that there's definitely lots to talk about. When's the last time? Our cycle often revolves around when's the last time we did something like this? When's the last time we released a Demacian champion? When's the last time we released a cute Yordle? When's the last time it was a female Yordle or something like that, right? And so, like, what was it? December 2015, we with the big Poppy update, we're like, great, let's scratch that itch, right? We haven't had a quality, female Yordle in a while, but there's always time for more. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, so I was just wondering because we've had a lot of cancelled champions, and I was just like, I know they get condensed into one new champion, so like our shit into Aurelion Sol. And I was wondering if there's a champion who was cancelled that still hasn't been created, or that didn't get condensed that you still want in the game.
So the first question is, are there champions that were canceled that did not get readapted and shipped? Tons. I mean, unreal amount, right? Like there were probably in the last 2 years, maybe 20 of them, right? And so, and that's just the last 2 years. And so this happens all the time, and sometimes we come back to it, right? Actually, some of the first concepts of Ivern, these like snail guys, that was from years ago. We said it's not going to work at the time. It just kind of went into our back pocket, and we didn't know if we were ever going to come back to it. We eventually did, but that champion could have been never made. The second part is, was there a champion that I'm attached to?
Still want.
Yeah. I think that for me personally, the one that I was closest to that had this happen to is I made a early prototype for a character that did eventually get repicked up and became Echo later, and it was pretty different when I was first working on it. But I'm happy because if that one I was like, oh, we got to make this character, and then so Echo is my redemption story. So that's why I'm here today to save my life.
Thank you. Thank you.
This would probably be more directed at John, but how do you decide on like the buffs, nerfs, and adjusts of champions? Like, do you make it depend on the low elo players, which is the majority of people, or related to the top tier, high LCS players?
I have this magic 8-ball, and I just ask it, ooh, should we nerf Ivern this patch? Normally it's like yes. I think it's heavily loaded towards yes.
It says the chances are good.
The chances are so good. More seriously, like we tend to balance around like 1800 MMR, which tends to be Plat Plus. We're taking into consideration all elos, but that is like our primary focus. We obviously look at competitive games too. So the answer is look at everything, but the band that we kind of like most hone in on is 1800 MMR.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Hi. My question is, from a design standpoint, why do you guys go with humanoids a lot? Like humans, yes, Yordles, yes, but monsters tend to get turned into humanoids as well. Brand is an elemental, but he's human. You made Flubber into a humanoid. My favorite Xerath is literally energy, and he's a humanoid. And Ivern was, I love those designs you gave for him. He is a tree that is also a humanoid. I'm just wondering why that design keeps coming up.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think that there's something, we aim for variety actually in the end, and I think that early on we did not do a good job, creating variety, but, and so we want to balance a mix of, and we do lots of like, very exciting spreadsheets of all the characters, like how many are female, how many are male, how many are monsters, like real monsters, like I'm a Cho'Gath or I'm a Rek'Sai, and how many are human, and then how many are humanoid and stuff like that. And so we try to balance that stuff around, but that's very loose, like high level. And so we say, okay, maybe it's time we made a true monster, or maybe it's time we made an actual human character because we haven't had one in a while. In the creative process of making a specific character, we would never make a design decision by spreadsheet. It's more about what's right for that character. And so with Ivern, I think for the Ivern specifically, it came to that point because the story that people were really excited about telling was a story about a man that then became a nature sort of creature and sort of learned, and learned a lesson and then sort of turned his life around. And so like him looking like a man is meant to tell the story of how he used to be a man. With some characters back in the day, like Xerath or something, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know.
We weren't there at the
I just think
time.
we weren't even thinking about it that hard. And everyone's like, look, he's cool. He's energy, arms and legs.
If you redesigned them like Brand or Xerath, would you have it that they burst out or something like that? Like completely give them a new model about their element?
Burst out as in how?
I was
Sorry.
in, so like Brand's an elemental stuck in humans' bodies. Body crumbles, he bursts out. Would
Yeah,
you
yeah.
remodel that as a fire elemental?
I think there would be a lot more of that for sure. And this is also part of like just the cost of making these characters. Like I think Xerath, in the ultimate super expensive CG version of Xerath, he probably sometimes materializes as a person, and so you can recognize like that the voice coming from the energy is a person, and it sort of shows you that form. But when he's casting spells, I don't know, he could be all over the place. He could be morphing into any type of shape he wants. He could be dispersing and coming back together, right? That definitely, when you have that option, becomes ideal.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Good question.
Hi there. I just wanted to say quickly, for anyone who thinks Ivern is bad, play him with Kled, Renekton, or Riven, and make any top laner cry. But my actual question is, at what point do you guys know you want to release a champion? Like, is there ever been a point where you wanted to release the champion, but Riot's gone, we're going to release this champion this month, and we want you to hold off?
We actually plan our schedule pretty well in advance, though things change, and it's more about, and we say, okay, we have this goal. When we first start on a champion like Ivern, in December of 2015, we're in the very, very infancy. Like, what could it be? It could be anything. It's a little baby. And we say, okay, because we eventually want to release this character in September-ish of 2016. And along the way, we sort of have all these checkpoints to see how we're doing. Like, do we have a good concept starting to form in January and February? Do we have a foundation for the gameplay? Do we have the sort of signature spells? Do we have the hook, right? And as you go, you sort of check in to see if you're on track. And there are points in that process where you might say, we're not on track, or this path does not look good, we need to reboot. And that's when you say, okay, we're fully rebooting, or we're canceling, or we're shifting some other project into this slot, or something like that. But by the time you get closer and closer to the end, you say, okay, we know we're gonna ship Ivern, we just need to try and put all the pieces together, produce all the art assets, produce all of the sound effects, and that is more about hitting a deadline than it is about what ifs, will this be right for the slot, stuff like that. And so then, that's more at the end of the process, and you still might say, okay, we're a little behind, let's delay it by 2 weeks, or we're ready to ship now, let's ship it now. But, so in the end, you usually, when all goes well, you're within plus or minus a month of your original release target.
I would say it's very rare that a champion gets pushed back because of other things that are happening on the company as well.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, patch to patch, definitely, but not more than like a patch. Like when we're talking with skins or champion update or something, they're like, hey, we have preseason this patch. We're like, okay, don't release then, because it's like there's too much stuff going on. Or, oh, hey, we have this really, really awesome project skin stuff, and we're like, okay, well, you guys do your thing. We'll wait a patch.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Singe is my first real main, and I'm
Yes.
love. So you talked earlier about how a lot of champions kind of share some core mechanics, like the 3-hit passive.
Sure.
How do you determine if two champions share too many? So like Morgana and Lux both have a skill shot root, they have damage in a circle, and they have a shield. How do you make sure that
That's
that
a good
doesn't
question.
happen?
It's not there's no like cookie cutter way to do that, actually, I think. And so take the Morgana Lux example. They share some at the skill level similarities, right? Actually, dark binding and light binding are very similar. But some of the other things I think are more surface level, right? They do damage in a circle is at the surface similar, but those spells actually end up manifesting in very different ways, right? Lux can poke you very effectively, whereas Morgana can't, and it's only a follow-up spell for hitting a dark, for the most part, or for pushing a wave. And then you zoom out one level even further, and you look at their sort of overall package as a champion, and this is like, Lux's goal is to poke you from range and catch you in a combo to sort of do a burst kill. Morgana's goal is to fish with Dark Bindings to catch you to then kind of all in for lockdown. And she's not as much of an aggressive kill threat, but she's much more of like, can I get into the enemy team and cause them all to get stunned or run away? So once you sort of evaluate all the different levels of, is the spell similar? Okay, it might be. Is the play pattern as a whole similar? If it's not, you're probably okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Echo, what's up?
Hi. Ivern main here, so thank you very much. My question was...
You got to cosplay as Ivern next time.
Yeah, I only had a week.
That would only take like 17 years to make, don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been really good to see Riot like reaching out a bit more. We've had the art book and seeing like all the articles on Ivern's development and like this panel come up. It's been really awesome as someone who's interested in conceptual art. Is there any chance of us getting more of that type of interaction?
I mean, yeah, I would say definitely. I think these things, when you see these trends, these are not flukes. They're usually because we're trying to make a concerted effort in one way or another. So we're like trying to be more active with dev blogs. And dev blogs being like game designers like us, or concept artists, or writers, or...
Data guys.
Yeah, the data analysts, right? Or even esports or whatever it is. And so, yeah, we're trying to be really active with that. And we know that the sort of the behind the scenes sort of process, how's the sausage made, is really interesting. I mean, it's interesting to us because we do this every day, but it also helps players to sort of deepen their connection to whatever their main is, or if they want to get into the industry and be a future Riot developer. We love all of that stuff. So yes, expect a lot of it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I think our time is...
Oh, we are out of time. Okay, let's do one final question, and then we will be hanging around to grab any people that want to have individual questions after we're done. Go for it.
Hi. So this is possibly a question that's been asked of you before, but you mentioned a few times how you will occasionally rework a champion after it's released because players are playing it in ways you don't expect. But were there any cases that stand out in your mind where the player behavior, so if they were just determined no matter what changes you were made to play it in a certain way, or you're inspired by what they did, that you reworked a champion's kit or changed their lore based on that player behavior?
Yes, I actually think there are definitely a couple times. I mean, a classic that we often refer to is the really popular and really iconic Lee Sin play that you can make, the insect kick. This was something that we did not at all design for or plan for, and became a thing where it was like players were like, oh, you can jump to a ward and you can kick someone, and so we're gonna make this great combo where I create a pick for my team. And that was just so cool that we said, well, this is worth keeping, and it ended up kind of becoming the defining feature of Lee Sin in late game team fights. So that is my example. Do you have one?
Yeah, I would say like in terms of just like a whole like going into a different role would be Lulu, where she's like, oh, she's now a solo laner, and like we've kind of gone back and forth on that, but we're not really unhappy with her as a solo laner. It's great that like there can be an enchantress in a solo lane. We just have to make sure that the lane pattern is healthy at that point and make sure like everything is in place. But I think a lot of people are a lot happier. She's like a lot more unique as a solo top mid laner than she is a support.
Yeah, this happens all the time. I mean, Zyra became a support, and we're like, great. Or oftentimes it's just we take a look at it, and if it's not doing anything bad, we're happy to support it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
Yep, thank you for
Enjoy
coming out
the
here.
rest of your weekend. Thanks for coming out. We've got some more panels tomorrow.
Yep, we'll be back
John's
tomorrow.
going to be giving a talk about our least 5 favorite top 5 pain in the ass
Biggest
champions.
pain in the ass champions. Yep.
So come out for that if you're interested. And if you want questions, we'll be hanging around.